Hey everyone, welcome back to the workshop. Artisan Pirate here, and in today's fun scroll saw project video, I have a beautiful piece of thankful word art to cut out for Thanksgiving 2025. Thanksgiving, of course, is right around the corner here, my friends. And you guys know it's one of the holidays that I really look forward to each and every calendar year when it rolls around, because it's not like the Christmas and shopping season where you have to get to so many places and get gifts for family, friends, and loved ones. And it's not like the previous holiday, which was Halloween, to where you have to dress up as a character, a spooky creature or something, and go trick-or-treating and go to Halloween parties and everything. Thanksgiving falls right in between those two, and the reason I love it is because there's no real hustle and bustle. Basically, you gather under usually a family's roof, and you get to enjoy the fellowship with your family, friends, and loved ones, and enjoy a fantastic home-cooked meal. I always look forward to it because we all get together, we get to kick back, we get to relax, and 9 times out of 10 I will always end up eating too much because the food is so delicious. And then after the meal we'll sit around, watch TV. If there's a game on, we'll watch that, and then usually we'll also start picking on each other. That's just how we do. And then of course smiles, memories, and laughter are made each and every year when Thanksgiving rolls around, and I really look forward to it. The design we're going to be cutting out comes from the old discontinued Creative Woodworks and Crafts Magazines, January 2008 to be precise, and the design in question begins on page 10. And I want to go on and thank Mrs. Tony and Sue. You can see them there in the corner for the beautiful Thanksgiving word art here. You can see a nice visual representation of the finished design, and you can see it does not have a base, so they obviously cut it out of thicker material where it can freestand without the need of a base. But as always with the versatility of scroll saw woodworking patterns, you can of course add a base. You could cut it out of thinner material and put a backer board on it to hang it on the wall. So always think outside of the box when approaching scroll saw patterns. The following pages have a nice little article about hopefully cutting it out and finishing it, you know, how you can go about doing that. So really cool. The full-size pattern is located in the pattern pull-out section, and I've got it folded to photocopy it over on the scanner. And you can see here the copy we made. It's not a really huge design at all, and what's really cool about it is I think you could make it, of course, in several different ways, but this could also be an accent piece on a table for some Thanksgiving decor. And the material we are going to be using was given to me by a family friend, one of my mom's ceramic friends. We went to collect some ceramic supplies, and she had this piece that was her husband's out in the ceramic shop, and I asked could I have it, and she said load it up, so I'm thankful for that as well. And I do believe it is oak, but you can see it's not been messed with for several years probably, and it's got some grime and dirt on it. So I thought that would look really cool once it was sanded up real nice, and the grain textures would really pop once we put the clear coat on it later on in the video. But I cut a piece off, and I do believe with the weight and texture of this material and the way it cut, I do believe it is oak. I'll know more once I get over to the scroll saw because I'm more familiar with how woods react over there at the scroll saw, if that makes any sense. But here will be our blank, and of course we're going to sand it up nice and smooth before attaching the pattern with clear packing tape. And I've also milled down an extra piece from the same board because, as I said when I held up the magazine, the one they made was made out of a single piece of material, and this material here is around 3/4 inch in thickness, and of course it wouldn't need a base to freestand, but I might opt to add a base once I get everything cut out and I can see everything out here in the workshop visually. That plays a huge part on how I go about finishing designs. I usually have an idea of how I want to finish a design, but then after I see it cut out on the scroll saw, that's when I can finalize how I want to finish the design, if that also makes any sense. But we will potentially put it on a nice little base here to give it a little bit more support and make it a little bit more sturdy. But what we need to do now is sand up the piece nice and smooth and get the pattern attached with clear packing tape so we can head over to the scroll saw and start scrolling. And of course we will have to do the pilot holes with the Seiko scroller's drill. So let's move the camera and do that now. And over here on the workbench we're going to take the random orbit sander and clean up our material a little bit before attaching the pattern. And you'll see here that I'm using a random orbit sander, and I will use a different sander later on in the vehicle. But now it's time to attach the pattern with clear packing tape. Clear packing tape is all I'll use to attach the pattern to the material here, and the oils in the clear packing tape can help lubricate the scroll saw blade and reduce burn marks when scrolling out harder material like this at the scroll saw. But now we are going to take the Seiko scroller's drill and drill out all of the pilot holes for internal cutting. And there's not very many in this project, only like 10 or 11 internal cuts. But then we will head over to the Rikon scroll saw and we will begin scrolling. For all of the scrolling on this project, I'll be using a number 5 Ultra reverse tooth blade, and it will cut through the 3/4 inch oak material here exceptionally well with minimal chip out. But keep in mind, with oak being a harder and denser material than the normal materials I like to scroll saw, it's just a lot slower of a cut than normal. So I am, of course, taking my time and letting the blade do the work. I'll begin, as usual, with some of the smaller internal cuts before proceeding to the larger and larger ones, working my way outwards. That's a general rule of thumb when it comes to scroll saw woodworking. But I'll soon be switching to a close-up view to hopefully give you guys a better perspective of me scrolling. You can see here that the pattern does have some of those tight V-turns in the internal cuts, and you guys know how I go about those. I'll go into one side of that V-cut, and then I'll back the scroll saw blade out and go into the other side of it and taper it down to as fine a point as the pattern calls for. Thanksgiving, I feel like, is often overlooked between the other two major holidays of Christmas and Thanksgiving, and I feel like I wanted to do more than one project this year, so there will be 2 scroll saw projects, this one and another one, dedicated to the Thanksgiving season. And this one here says what Thanksgiving is all about, and that is, of course, giving thanks. The pattern comes from the old discontinued Creative Woodworks and Crafts Magazines. Again, we found a bunch of those cleaning up in the spring earlier this year, and when I seen a lot of them, I knew I would want to bring them to life visually over here on the platform in future videos. We are now doing the final long outside perimeter cut, which will release the piece from the waste wood. Again, taking my time and letting the blade do the work and being as loyal as I can be to the cut line. And I did go through 2 scroll saw blades while scrolling out this project due to the hardness and density of the oak material. If you guys like what you're seeing, I would highly encourage you to subscribe to my channel and also follow me across all my social media feeds under the Artisan Pirate name. I'd really appreciate the support. But once we come back around here, all of the scroll saw work will be complete for this project, and then we can move over to the workbench. Over here on the workbench, I'll be as careful as possible removing the piece, because oak, when you start cutting out some finer details like this project has, can be very brittle and break off easily, so I was being very careful with the piece. And you can see that it'll easily freestand of its own accord there on the workbench, but I wanted to add a nice little base to it with another piece of the oak, and I'm just eyeballing this here with just some rough measurements and cutting it down to size over at the Rikon table saw. But after we get everything cut here, it'll be time to head over to the router table, and I'll put a Roman OG profile on just the front side and back side of the base. You guys know I like doing bases like this just for an artistic and different style for the base. But now we'll head over to sanding, and now I'll be sanding with a vibrating palm sander here. It's a lot more kinder to delicate scroll saw work like this. It doesn't have that aggressive spinning motion like the orbital sander, but I am using 180 grit Klingspor Woodworking Shop sandpaper here and sanding everything up nice and smooth. But after everything is sanded, it'll be time to glue the 2 pieces together. And for the glue up, I'll be using medium grade CA glue and activator, and it basically bonds and dries instantly after you spray the activator. And I'm just eyeballing it here on the base, but I still like to leave the project sitting for around 5 minutes to make sure that glue completely dries and cures. And while it is drying, we can enjoy the beautiful fall leaves out in the backyard. And I hope all of you My family, friends, followers, and subscribers have a happy Thanksgiving with your family, friends, and loved ones this year. But after the glue had dried, we finished the projects with several coats of Rust-Oleum clear gloss. And when that dried, the project was complete. Thank you all for watching. And here we have the completed Give Thanks Thanksgiving word art, cut out primarily over on the scroll saw from start to finish, and it finished up beautifully. I really love how this beautiful word art finished up, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. Once again, it came from an older issue of Creative Woodworks and Crafts Magazines. And before we go any further, I want to thank once again Mrs. Tony and Sue for the beautiful design featured in the magazine that I'll hold up as we get ready to close the video here momentarily. It took me around an hour to scroll this project out from start to finish, completely over at the scroll saw. And you're going to ask why it took me so long, because it's not that complicated of a pattern. There's only like 9 or 10 internal cuts, and then the final long outside perimeter cut to release the scroll work from the waste wood. And the reason that is because this is 3/4 inch oak, and oak is a harder and denser material as opposed to 3/4 inch pine shelving board I like to teach with visually over here on the platform, or the 1/4 inch plywood that I like to cut a lot of projects out, especially when it comes to stack cutting and everything. Again, it's a slower cut because of the hardness and density of the oak. But as always, take your time and let the blade do the work, and be as loyal as you can be to the cut line, and you should do just fine. But you can easily and legibly tell what this says. It says give thanks for Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is fast upon us, my friends, where we will gather and eat a nice delicious meal with our family, friends, and loved ones. But I'm really happy with how this came out, and the Rust-Oleum clear gloss we added at the end really made the oak grain textures pop and give it a nice glossy appearance and protection for years to come. And as you guys seen over at the router table, I again only put a decorative edge on the front and back side of it. I think that's just a nice artistic visual to add to projects like this, as opposed to going all the way around with the base. But again, as I'll show you when we hold up the magazine before we close the video, the one that they had featured visually in the magazine didn't even have a base. And with it being 3/4 inches in thickness, you of course do not need a base. It can easily freestand on a shelf, desk, or countertop. Just adding a nice decorative routered base gives it a little bit more style, a little bit more class, and a little bit more elegance, and it takes the scroll saw project to the next level. So always keep that in mind when you approach the scroll saw patterns. Options and versatility for a design like this. As I said at the beginning, you could make the project just as is. You could photocopy the pattern out of the full-size pattern pull-out section. There you see the pattern we got the copy from. You can attach it to your material. Here's the material we used in today's video, and cut the project out and just be happy with that. But of course, you can always go above and beyond. You could paint this up in some nice seasonal fall and autumnal colors. You know, if you had a little miniature turkey, you could sit it here maybe on the T or on the V, you know, to dress it up a little bit. If you wanted to add a base, you could put some maybe seasonal nuts like pecans, cashews, walnuts down here, just to represent the fall and harvest season, you know, because that is another thing that is collaborated with Thanksgiving, is the harvest season and everything. And I also feel like you could cut it out of thinner material, and you could even stack cut them and make several at one time if you were doing craft fairs or farmers markets or vendor markets or things like that, and then put a nice colorful backer board and give it a nice two-toned appearance. And of course, you can go in here and paint it, you could stain it, but I love the grain texture of oak, and I'm going to leave it just as is. As you can tell, it is ultimately finished. It's just got to completely dry overnight, because now that we are in the cooler months, it does take longer and longer for the clear coats, the paints, the stains, and the finishes to dry out here in the workshop. So it is just a little bit tacky in a few places. So just be aware of that if you clear coat something and it's in a colder area. But really neat. And another really cool idea I have for this is to take the pattern again. It's very small in nature, but you could enlarge it and maybe cut it out with a jigsaw and make a nice bit of Thanksgiving yard art. I know when it comes to Thanksgiving projects. They're very few and far between for some reason. There's not very many for scroll saw woodworking. So when I seen this one here, I knew I'd have to bring it to life visually over here on the platform. I know in the past I've probably made almost 90% of the Thanksgiving projects that Steve Good has offered on his free pattern catalog. So when I was going through the magazine that I'm now getting ready to hold up, I knew I'd have to make the project and bring it to life visually over here on the platform for the Thanksgiving season. But again, it came from the old discontinued Creative Woodworks and Crafts Magazine, January 2008, and we had already made a project out of this earlier in the year, so it was really cool to go back and revisit these old discontinued magazines. And the design, as I said, began on page 10, and there you see their visual representation, again with no base. You could even cut this project out of inch thick material and it'd make it that much sturdy, so to speak, for it to basically stand without a base, if that makes any sense. But again, I just wanted to add a base for a little bit more style and elegance for the Thanksgiving scroll saw project video that we have made here today. And again, it follows with an article on how to make the project and bring it to life visually, and a list of materials you may need, so that's also really cool. But again, as always, the skies are the limit when it comes to scroll saw projects and how you make them out in your garage or workshop. And I hope this video inspires you guys before Thanksgiving fully gets here, for you to go out in your garage or workshop and make some sawdust and make a creative Thanksgiving design that you can set out with all the food on Thanksgiving Day when you gather with your family, friends, and loved ones. But one more cool look at it. Really, again, happy with how it came out and how that oak finished up. And I want to once again thank my mom's ceramic friend for giving me that oak board that we milled down that I held up at the beginning of the video. So we took this old board that hadn't been used in a long time. We cut off a piece of it, and with a little bit of time, practice, patience, and effort, we got this beautiful Thanksgiving design cut out over on the scroll saw. Really, really neat and fascinating to me. That's going to be about all for this one. If you're new to the channel, hopefully you'll click that subscribe button and also follow me across all my social media feeds under the Artisan Pirate name. As always, links to contact me as well as all my social media feeds will always be linked down in the description box below these videos. That's about all for this one, and remember guys, if I can make it or do it, so can you guys. I'm the Artisan Pirate. Take care, and I'll see you guys real soon.